So, hello everyone. I am here with Sarah King, and she's very kindly joined me to talk about her chat that she had at the conference, the ISES 2025 conference. So, Sarah, I'll hand it over to you to introduce yourself, and we can just have a talk about your research.
Hey, yeah. I'm Sarah King. I'm a research scientist at Colorado State University. I've spent most of my career examining the behavior and ecology of horses, both wild horses in terms of Przewalski's horses, as well as feral horses and donkeys. And obviously, also have a strong interest in horses in domesticated state in captivity as well.
Wonderful. Well, that is my dream role, so I'm very jealous. But to start us off, based on your work, why is it so important to look at feral horses and donkeys when we're thinking about horse welfare and it maybe in captivity as well?
Yeah, I think that there's so much that we can learn about horses when they're living in a natural state. So a lot of what we're doing with equitation science is trying to improve the welfare, improve the standards of horses living in human care. And I think that we need to be informed by how they behave in the wild to really understand that. I think that there are often a lot of misconceptions, and there are a lot of differences when horses are kept in human care. We often have a lot of horses at high density with very restricted resources in terms of like water and like, food. And so it's very different when they're living in the wild where they have complete choice about where to go, what to eat, and even who to associate with. So I think the more that we can learn from the wild horses, the more that then we can improve the conditions of horses in captivity. And we can do that based on science.
Definitely. And I think choice is a really big one, you touched on just there as well, where they have all of these opportunities, social opportunities, freedom or movement opportunities, and foraging opportunities that they have that you've obviously observed, where it's really, really limited. And how can we how can we change their environment in captivity to be able to provide them with a species typical kind of environment.
Yeah, I mean, we think a lot about, the five domains and the freedom, forage, and friends. But I think agency, like as much as we can give our animals agency, I think is really important. So giving them the freedom to decide about things that directly affect them. And obviously that can be a challenge, and because we are often constrained by space, by finances. But I think as much as we are able to do that, I think that that will reap rewards in the relationship that we have with these animals and with the animal's mental state. And so it can even look just like mental enrichment or environmental enrichment, just providing more resources in different places and just yeah, just whatever we can do to help our animals be, especially horses. I mean, they spend a lot of time moving, they spend a lot of their day feeding, and they spend a lot of their day just standing around. And so just making sure that they have access to places to do these things and that is comfortable for them.
Definitely. And you studied feral horses and feral donkeys. What were some of the biggest differences that you noticed in how they lived and interact in feral situations?
Yeah, so there's a big difference between horses and donkeys. And donkeys, I think, in general, need a lot more attention. There's surprisingly little research done on donkeys. And I think that people often view them, oh, as just little horses. But they're not, they're a completely different species. They're separated by over 2 million years of phylogenetic evolution. They have completely different ancestors. And so what we found is that really the horses and the donkeys. Sorry, I have a dog here also who's trying to get me to play.
No, it's fine.
Um, so we have yeah, so I think that so we found that the horses and the donkeys, they have the same social system as their ancestors. So donkeys are derived from African wild ass, and they have this very different social system to horses. So I think we're all familiar with the horses living in harem groups of a stallion with a group of mares and their offspring. Whereas donkeys don't live in those stable social groups. They have what's called a fission fusion social system. So although some individuals may stay together for a certain period of time, they sort of come together and go apart. And then they and yeah, and so they don't you don't really see them in harem groups and with these permanent social bonds. And so I think that's a big difference. And we also found in terms of their behavior that donkeys exhibit just so much more social interactions than horses do. I think that we think of donkeys as being very sort of still and stoic, but in terms of agonistic, so some more aggressive interactions as well as affiliative or friendly interactions, we see that a lot more often in the donkeys than in the horses. And possibly because when they do come together, they need to fit all of their social interactions into that relatively short period of time. Whereas because horses are remaining together, they're very familiar with each other and they don't need to have that. Um, uh, yeah, they don't need to keep checking who each other is, kind of thing.
Sure.
So yeah, so donkeys and horses are really very different, and so that has implications for their management as well, and really for how we think about them. We need to treat donkeys as their own species, and not just as sort of another breed of horse.
Definitely. And I think you do tend to see, if you do see donkeys, there are horses around, maybe close by. So maybe possibly being managed the same. I can't say that as a kind of blanket statement, but you can make assumptions that that probably is the case. So that's really, really important. I really liked that when you spoke about that also with the fission fusion. I didn't personally know that myself in feral populations of donkeys. So how would we be able to, and I know we haven't particularly reached an ideal situation for horses in captivity, but in regards to donkeys, if we are seeing kind of the fission fusion system compared to kind of the stable harems of horses, how would you try and manage that in a domestic environment?
Yeah, I think that the main thing probably is that donkeys simply need more space
Sure.
than we really consider. And I think that I mean with horses as well, we know that as you decrease the amount of size available, that the aggression rate goes up. And so I think that with donkeys as well, just giving them that space so that they can get away from each other if they want, even if it's just having sort of visual barriers or having a really large pasture. I mean, I think that donkeys are considered small-bodied, and so often they do seem to be in smaller areas. I mean, again, I don't know that as a blanket statement, but I think that often people may assume that they need less space. Um, and also, donkeys are often used as companions for horses, and so you'll see a donkey and a horse together. And of course, and that does seem to work for a lot of people, a lot of situations, but you have to remember that they are actually, speaking slightly different languages. So it's not ideal.
Yeah,
But yeah, I think always giving these animals as much space as we can, I think is a good thing.
definitely. And in regards to moving on to reproductive success and how it tied to positive social bonds, and I think this also kind of relates to what you stated at the beginning, being misconceptions. And for example, the stallion being quite an aggressive animal, or the mares always putting the other horses in their place, these kind of terms. But we're finding, and we know that reproductive success is relies on positive social affiliation. So how does that look in feral situations?
Yeah, so it was really cool in our study that that's what we found, because you see so much rhetoric about stallions stealing the mares and basically that it's all being up to the stallions to hold the mares. And we were interested in looking at this because in horse societies, although often you have just one stallion with a group of mares, sometimes you'll see multiple males. And so often a harem stallion with another stallion in the group that we called a lieutenant. Um, and also some males that just sort of follow along behind the group that we called tags. And we were really interested in these different male strategies and how that affected reproductive success. And what we found was that there's actually a lot of female choice in these societies. That the mares are really choosing these stallions who are just single male, that don't have any of these other males hanging around. Because even when, females, there were a lot more foals born in those groups. Those were the most common groups. But then if a female did choose to mate with a different male than her harem stallion, that generally it wasn't to one of these other males floating around, it was to another single male harem stallion.
Mm.
And then what really helped a male retain that status, and so what would increase his reproductive success, was being in close proximity with his mares. I mean, I was really surprised that mares, when we looked at nearest neighbor, so who is closest to, which individuals are closest to each other, just amongst adults, that mares and stallions tended to be closer together even than mares and other mares. So there are these strong bonds between a mare and the harem stallion. And the more that they tended to be in close proximity and the more affiliative interactions that they had, so these touches, the mutual grooming, things like that, then yeah, that did contribute to the reproductive success of the stallion. And we found really strong reproductive skew in horse societies. So just a handful of males were responsible for almost half of the foals. And so there really are some stallions that are really successful, whereas other males tend to don't get a look in or just have fewer foals. And the important thing also that we found was that there was no relationship of this with agonistic interactions. So we think a lot about, we see all of this imagery of stallions like herding mares, to retain their group. And the stallion, keeping their mares and all of this. But in fact, that had no relationship at all with either reproductive success of that male or the length of time that he remained as a harem stallion. And so it really doesn't benefit the male to be more aggressive, but it does benefit him to have these friendly interactions with the mares. And so I think really thinking about the amount of female choice that is going on in horse societies, I think is really important, and getting away from this view that it's the stallions that are driving everything.
Definitely. I think that really nicely solidifies kind of how um, uh, equine interactions rely on social cohesion and affiliative interactions and closeness, social closeness, because uh, I don't like to use the word normal and not normal. I try to use species typical and non-species typical, because I don't technically like to say that an behavior any behavior is abnormal. But when we look at in domestic environments, seeing horses with consistent agonistic interactions, I would say that's not species typical. And I think this is kind of the evidence that supports that as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we can only assume that those animals are really very stressed, that they're not necessarily living in a situation that is optimal for them. And I think as humans, it's so easy for us to focus on, because also to think about dominance and to look at aggressive interactions. And I think that you hear so much of that rhetoric, and it's like, oh, you need to be dominant over whether it's dogs or horses, but putting the human in that dominant role. Whereas, so I'm really pleased that this research showed that that is not the glue that holds horse societies together, that it's the friendly interactions that they need. And so for us to view that in our relationships with horses, obviously we're not horses, but at least if we can if we can be that friendly interactor, then we're more likely to have a better relationship with our horses. And then also to really think about the dynamics in the herds that we have in human care, and to try and optimize that.
Definitely. And I won't go too much into dominance because it's a very big topic and spoken about topic and controversial. But I think, as you said as well, with when it comes to people attempting to apply, there's two things there. There's people attempting to apply um, equine species typical behavior into human horse interactions, which there is no evidence that horses actually perceive us to be other horses. And if we can ever mimic those particular behaviors to achieve what we're hoping to achieve, I'm not sure. But also, people need to remember that dominance doesn't just equal aggression. There are many different types of dominance within a social interaction. And people also like to say providing submission rather than taking dominance. And as you said, it doesn't seem to be a um like a natural wanted situation that doesn't even improve um reproductive success. So hopefully this is a small comment, but hopefully another point that we can get out there that hopefully people can take on board.
Absolutely, yeah. Yes, and how that the friendly interactions are really what's important. And it's not all about, the pushing, the fights, that those are and frankly in the wild populations that those are really it's relatively rare to see agonistic interactions.
Mm.
Uh, because in that when horses have space, when they can choose who they're with, they can simply leave. And then even stallions, they can put visual separation between them and another group. And also stallions that it's really common that the stallions also that they play with each other. We'd see a stallion leave his harem group and run towards a group of bachelors, and then think, oh, there's going to be a big fight, and then they would play together, and then he would come back to his mares, and yeah, having had some man time. um, so I think that there is, yeah, I think it's challenging because it's again, to our eye, I think that the agonistic interactions are so much more visible. I think that we miss a
Yeah.
lot. I think that we're tuned to notice that, the bites, the kicks, the ears back, all of that. And whereas we're less tuned to see, the friendly touches, the mutual grooming, and just the resting heads on each other, just even standing next to each other. And all of those things are just the very sort of gentle, subtle ways that horses express their friendship. Yeah, whereas and dominance, just one more thing about dominance is that it's also very context specific. That it really is about who has the biggest need for that resource in that point in time. It's not necessarily about, oh, this horse is always bossing the other ones. It's just like, okay, this horse really wants that hay right now, and so it's gonna make sure that it has access to that resource above all others. And then everyone's like, oh, that's the alpha.
Yeah,
But it's just in that
it's
specific situation.
absolutely. It's a dynamic situation. And as you said, in that particular situation, what's their previous winning history? What's the competitor's previous winning history?
Right.
And as you said, what's their motive? How strong is their motivation to get that resource? What's their resource holding potential? There are so many different. What are they? Is that opponent or competitor ill that day, or they're more focused on their other motivators. So on that day in that time, that horse, sorry, is the alpha, but tomorrow they won't be because it's another resource. And people are so um they think of it as the alpha, as you said, of all resources. It's just not, first of all, it's not feasible, and
Mm.
also it doesn't provide any kind of benefit as a herd animal. Oh, anyway, I'm just going off on one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and then I mean, we see females. So females will change groups. Mares will change groups both with and without any pressure from stallions. I mean, mares will choose to change groups, and so I think if if mares are getting receiving too much aggression, they will leave, and they will leave for other reasons as well. So yeah, again, it comes down to female choice, and
Mm,
so yeah, so it benefits the stallions to make the females choose them or help the females choose them.
that's great, thank you. So you said one thing that did surprise me was the result of castrating some of the stallions and that it didn't seem to change their behavior very much. Why, what's going on there?
Yeah, I think that this is fascinating. So yeah, so at one of our populations that we looked at, we castrated, it ended up being 42% of the adult males at that time. And so we castrated across all ages. And then because we had gathered data the previous year, so we knew the social status of males at the time of castration. And so we were able to castrate both bachelor males, so males not associating with females, and harem stallions that were associating with females. And in the first year after castration, there was absolutely no change in their behavior, the social structure of the groups. It was, yeah, it was as if the males were still intact. It was quite phenomenal. And we did see a reduction in foaling the following breeding season because those males were continuing to yeah, to associate with their females. We saw, and then over the subsequent 3 years, we did see the gelded harem stallions did tend to the harems became smaller, and they many of those stallions did lose, the mares joined other groups. But one gelding, he kept his harem throughout the study, and other gelded harem stallions were still associating with mares, were still becoming harem stallions, even 3 years after being castrated. So their reproductive behavior, their agonistic behavior, did not change. So and so that was really interesting. And so I think that there's a lot of social context going on. And there are other sources of testosterone in the body besides the testicles, but it could simply be that the males have this social pattern of interaction with mares. Once they've achieved that harem stallion status, they then carry on behaving like that. Because we did find that the bachelors, the males who were gelded as bachelors, most of them just remained as bachelors throughout the rest of the study. Whereas the other males, the intact males who were of that same cohort, almost all of those became harem stallions. So, so I do think that there must be a certain amount of social learning, sort of learning those behavior patterns, and then once the males have those behavior patterns, then that's how they're going to continue to act. But yeah, and I'm sure again that it's all very situation based as well, because we do see feral horses that are brought in from the wild and gelded, and they don't necessarily continue acting like harem stallions in captivity. So when they're tamed and truly domesticated.
Mm.
So I think it's a very yeah it was one of those studies that when you start out the study, everyone's like, oh well, we know exactly what's going to happen. They're just going to lose all interest in females and they're just going to hang out and get fat and eat grass kind of thing. But we found yeah we really didn't find that at all. So it's really interesting. Yeah.
That is fascinating. Has there been any previous findings that looked at something similar or?
No, in general, there's actually been very little research done on castration in pretty much any mammal, which I find really surprising because we've been using this as a tool for millennia. But there's surprisingly little literature out there. I think there was a little bit on like rats and monkeys and coyotes, but even on dogs, there's very little. And especially to have a longitudinal study where you have the look at the behavior before and afterwards of the same individuals to really look at those differences and also we could compare with controls and we so we could really look at those we could really look at it from all angles. But yeah, so really there's only, especially with horses, there are only a few anecdotal studies about geldings that then would be put in a field with mares and then, moved to a new facility and then suddenly were acting like harem stallions and then were brought back to the previous facility and they acted like, a calm gelding again. So, and then people I think often assume, oh, they were gelded late, or oh, it's proud cut. But I think that behavior is available probably to all of these males, but I think it's social experience and just the social situation that whether that behavior actually manifests.
That is really interesting. And I'm aware of the research or the lack of in dogs, and a lot of it is also owner reported, and it's hard to do behavioral observations and what are you actually testing.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to previous history and where those dogs or other animals came from. You'd need a lot of evidence there. But that's
Yeah,
really
with
interesting. Sorry, yeah.
domestic dogs, it is a challenge because there are so many factors that are affecting their behavior in the home. There was one study that did look at feral dogs in Chile, I think. And I think that they also, yeah, didn't see much difference in behavior. But yeah, it's a while since I've read that paper. So.
Wonderful, thank you. And just to I actually wanted to ask about time budgets, I think. And then yeah. So when we look at how they spend their days, in do horses and donkeys, so in regards to time budgets, what stood out to you mostly when comparing the two?
Yeah, so donkeys spent a lot more time lying down than horses. I think that horses spent more time standing than donkeys, but yeah, but donkeys definitely lay down more. And with both of them, we found a surprisingly small proportion of their day that they were feeding. And that could have been because we did our observations in the summer. So they could have been compensating by feeding overnight. And we also had proportion of our observations where the individuals were simply out of sight. So they could have been feeding then as well. But I think it is worth then really thinking about, so in the summer when we're feeding horses, maybe they would prefer to eat at night because during the day, so my work on Przewalski's horses as well, where I did look at them 24 hours, that and during the day they spend so much time just standing and avoiding flies. And so then, it's uncomfortable for them, I think, to be eating during the day because they're so irritated by insects, even if they're not being bitten. And so, yeah, so I think that was one of the main things that came out to me with the time budget data.
Definitely. That's great. And just to round off, if someone what is watching or listening today only remembers one or two things from your research in regards to how we can take this and apply it to our horses, what would you want it to be?
Yeah, I mean, really, yeah. So yeah, the main two things is that donkeys are different. That they're not just little horses; they are a completely different species, and so they should be yeah, respected, treated as such, and also that affiliative interactions are really important in horse society, and that affiliative these friendly behaviors are really more important than agonistic behaviors, and so I think yeah, viewing horse society through that lens instead of always like the big dramatic bites and kicks, I think is really important. And that's something which I've believed for many years, and I'm thrilled that I was able to finally show it scientifically that yeah, affiliative interactions are the most important thing in horse society.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.